Ever smile at someone who insulted you because you knew the checkmate was coming later? Yeah, that was me. Let me set the scene properly because moments like this don't come out of nowhere. They're built slowly, quietly. Over years of love, sacrifice, and instincts you earn the hard way. It was a crisp October night in Austin, Texas, the kind where the air finally cools enough to remind you that summer doesn't own you forever. The windows were cracked open, letting in that dry Texas breeze, and every candle in my dining room was lit like I was hosting a magazine shoot instead of a family dinner. I had been cooking since early afternoon, pot roast. Real pot roast, the kind that takes patience, slow cooked until the meat falls apart just by looking at it, carrots softened perfectly, potatoes soaking up flavor. I wanted everything to be right, not because I needed approval, but because this mattered. After 6 months of mystery dating, my son was finally bringing her home. David is 35 years old, smart, kind, successful, and heartbreakingly optimistic when it comes to people, especially women. I'd watched him fall for charm before, watched him ignore red flags because he wanted to believe so badly that this time was different. So when he said, "Mom, I think she's the one," I didn't celebrate, I prepared. I straightened family photos on the mantle, pictures of David as a child, his father, God rest him, smiling in that old flannel jacket he refused to throw away, our life, our history. The things people study when they want to know what they're stepping into. Then the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door, and there she was, Camille Dubois, petite, stylish, perfect posture. The kind of woman who looks effortless, but you know effort lives underneath. Her hair fell just right, her makeup was natural in that expensive way. Her confidence wasn't loud or flashy, it was quiet, controlled, dangerous. She stepped forward, took both my hands gently, looked me straight in the eyes, and said in that smooth French accent, "Mrs. Thompson, David talks about you all the time. I feel like I already know you." Oh, she was good, very good. She complimented the house, not too much, just enough, asked about old photos on the wall, laughed at the right moments, helped clear plates without being asked like she'd been trained for it. David watched her like a proud teenager. "She speaks 5 languages," he said, glowing. "She's been teaching me French," Camille laughed softly. "His accent is how you say adorable." We all laughed, and in that moment I thought, okay, maybe this one's real. Maybe my son finally didn't fumble. She praised the food like it changed her life, told me it reminded her of home, asked thoughtful questions, listened more than she spoke, every box checked. But here's the thing you learn when you've lived long enough. Some people don't walk into your home to join your family, they walk in to study it. I didn't know it yet, but that night wasn't about love, it was about access. And while Camille thought she was auditioning for the role of perfect future wife, she didn't realize she was being watched by a woman who had raised a son alone, buried a husband, survived betrayal, and learned the hard way that the sweetest smiles sometimes hide the sharpest knives. And the worst part, she thought I was harmless. That mistake was about to cost her everything. Never assume someone doesn't understand your language. That mistake has destroyed more scams than bad luck ever could. Dinner was going smoothly. Too smoothly, the pot roast had been served. Wine poured. Camille laughed easily, her hand resting on David's arm like it belonged there. She nodded at the right moments, asked thoughtful questions, and played the role flawlessly. If you didn't know any better, you'd think she was already family. Then David's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned slightly, and stood up. "Work," he said. "I'll just take this real quick." He stepped out onto the back porch, closing the sliding door behind him. That was the moment everything shifted. I was in the kitchen, loading plates into the dishwasher, listening to the hum of the house, the clink of silverware, the quiet jazz playing in the background, the faint sound of David's voice muffled through glass. Then Camille's phone rang. She checked the screen and smiled, not the polite smile she'd been wearing all evening. A real one. She answered instantly in French, fast, relaxed, casual. The kind of tone you use when you're speaking freely, because you think no one around you understands a word. And that's where she made her fatal mistake. Because what Camille didn't know, what David had never thought to mention, was that I spent 4 years living in Lyon when I was younger. I worked as an au pair while putting myself through college. I didn't just study French in a classroom. I lived it. My accent, not pretty. My grammar, not perfect. But my comprehension, crystal clear. At first, I tried not to listen. It felt invasive, rude, then I heard my name. "She's old, harmless," Camille said, laughing softly. Desperate to see her son happy, easy to manage, my body froze, one plate halfway into the dishwasher, my hand hovering in midair. "She has no idea," Camille continued. "I'm playing the perfect future wife. She eats it up." My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "She even thinks I love the house," Camille said. "The house is bigger than he described." She paused. "And yes, there are assets. The father left them comfortable." She laughed again, not nervous, not awkward, cold, calculated. "I'm already working the inheritance angle," she continued. "Americans are so emotional about family money. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Years of sacrifice, my husband's life insurance, the home I protected for my son, reduced to a talking point. Then she said the sentence that snapped something inside me. The green card will be easy once we marry, Camille said. Divorce after 2 years. I leave with citizenship and enough money to live freely in Paris. 2 years, that's all she saw. 2 years of pretending, 2 years of performance. 2 years before she disappeared, with my son's trust, his heart, and our family's security, my hands started shaking, not from fear, from rage. Every instinct screamed at me to march into that room, to expose her, to scream her lies in both languages if I had to. But I didn't, because here's something people underestimate about mothers: we don't just react, we calculate. And in that moment, I realized something very important. Camille thought she was smarter than everyone in the room. She thought language made her invisible. She thought charm made her untouchable. And most of all, she thought I was weak. That illusion was about to become her biggest regret. I slowly placed the plate into the dishwasher, closed it, took a breath, and that's when fate added one final detail. My hand slipped. The plate fell. Collision shattered across the kitchen floor. The sound cut through the house like a gunshot. Camille rushed in instantly. Her face transformed: concern, warmth, alarm. "Mrs. Thompson, are you okay?" Oscar-level acting. And that's when I understood something chilling. This woman didn't just lie, she performed. And now that I knew the script, I was ready to rewrite the ending. The most dangerous moment isn't when someone explodes, it's when they smile and decide to stay calm. The plate shattered at my feet. Porcelain across the tile, silence hanging heavy in the air. For a split second, I stayed still. Not because I was shocked, but because I was thinking. Every instinct in my body was firing at once, yet my face remained neutral. Years of experience had taught me that control is louder than confrontation. Camille appeared in the doorway instantly, her face twisted into concern so convincing it deserved an award. "Mrs. Thompson. Are you okay?" she exclaimed, already kneeling beside me. Her hands were gentle as she touched my arm, her voice soft, reassuring, perfect. I met her eyes and smiled. "Just clumsy," I said lightly. "These old hands, you know." She shook her head sympathetically. "Oh no, please be careful, let me help you." She grabbed paper towels, carefully collecting the broken pieces like she'd done it 1,000 times before. "I've worked in hotels," she said casually. "Cleaning teaches humility." Another lie, smooth, practiced, delivered like truth. I knelt beside her, helping pick up shards, watching her movements closely. Everything about her was controlled: the way she held herself, the way she spoke, even the way she showed concern. This wasn't panic, this was performance. David walked back in, phone still in hand, eyes scanning the scene. "Oh well, what happened?" I waved him off. "Nothing dramatic," I said, "just gravity reminding me who's boss." He laughed, relieved. Camille looked up at him with that soft, affectionate smile. "Your mother is wonderful," she said. "I already feel so lucky to be here." Lucky. The word echoed in my head like a warning bell. David smiled, clearly proud. "Look at you two already bonding." Camille reached out, squeezing my hand gently. "You raised an incredible man," she said. "I feel like family already." I looked straight at her, really looked, and I said very calmly, "Well, sweetheart, you already feel like family." Her smile widened. She thought she'd won. What she didn't see was the moment something shifted behind my eyes. Because right then, kneeling on a kitchen floor surrounded by broken porcelain, I made a decision. Crossmark, I would not confront her. Crossmark, I would not warn my son, not yet. White, heavy checkmark, I would outplay her. Camille believed I was an aging woman desperate to see her son settled down. She believed love made me blind. She believed language made her safe, and she believed time was on her side. She was wrong on all counts. The rest of the evening passed like a carefully choreographed dance. Camille stayed flawless, laughing, complimenting, touching David's arm at just the right moments. I stayed polite, observant, quiet, and strategic, because information is power and I had just gained all of it. Later that night, as dessert was being served, I casually steered the conversation. "You know," I said, swirling my tea, "a neighbor of mine just went through the immigration process for her daughter-in-law. Very complicated." Camille stiffened, just slightly. David leaned in. "Really?" "Oh yes," I continued. "Interviews, financial reviews, background checks, they're very thorough these days." Camille smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she said carefully, "every country must protect itself." I nodded. "Exactly. Especially when marriage is involved." She shifted in her seat, not much, but enough. And in that moment I knew, she heard me, she didn't know how much I understood, but she knew she wasn't invisible anymore. That was the beginning of the end. Because from that point forward, every move Camille made would be under a microscope, every word she spoke would be weighed, and every plan she thought was hidden would be quietly dismantled. She came into my house thinking she was playing chess with amateurs. She didn't realize she just sat across from someone who had been playing survival games her entire life. And the checkmate? Oh, that was still coming. The hardest lies aren't told to enemies. They're told to protect the people you love. That night after Camille left, I didn't sleep, not for a minute. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every smile, every calculated pause from dinner. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to shut down because once a mother realizes her child is in danger, rest becomes a luxury. Sometime around 2 a.m., I gave up pretending. I got out of bed, wrapped myself in a cardigan, and walked down the hall to my late husband's study. That room hadn't changed in years. Same heavy oak desk, same shelves lined with binders and folders. Same faint smell of old paper and aftershave that never quite went away. 40 years of a man's life reduced to documents, wills, insurance policies, investment accounts, property deeds. The kind of things predators don't just notice, they hunt. I sat in his chair, turned on the lamp, and stared at the evidence of everything we'd built, and that's when the weight of it truly hit me. This wasn't just about romance. It was about access, money, security, immigration, opportunity, and my son, good-hearted, trusting David, was standing right in the middle of it, completely unaware. People ask me later, why didn't you just tell him? It sounds simple when you're not living inside it. But love has a way of making intelligent people reckless. And infatuation, that stuff turns grown men into toddlers with credit cards and confidence issues. I knew exactly how that conversation would play out. If I confronted him that night, here's what would have happened. I become the overbearing, jealous mother, Camille becomes the misunderstood foreign woman. David proposes faster just to prove I'm wrong. I've seen that movie. I've watched it ruin families. You don't break a spell by screaming, you break it by letting the illusion crack on its own. So instead of blowing up the board, I did something far more dangerous. I stayed quiet, I smiled. And I started watching everything, because when someone thinks you're dumb, they get sloppy. The next morning, David called like nothing was wrong, bright, cheerful, in love. Mom, he said, Camille couldn't stop talking about you. She says you're incredible. I closed my eyes. That's sweet, I replied. Pause, I've been thinking about proposing. My heart clenched so hard I swear it bruised. Proposing, I repeated, keeping my voice steady. Yeah, he said, excited. Maybe around Christmas. Christmas, 2 months away. I imagined it instantly, the ring, the photos, the announcement, the paperwork starting before the champagne even went flat. Inside my head, a checklist started running on its own. Marriage, green card application, 2-year wait, divorce, citizenship, financial settlement. She had his entire life scheduled like a Google Calendar event. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, lying straight through my teeth with a level of calm I didn't know I was capable of. After we hung up, I sat in silence. No tears, no panic, just clarity. This wasn't a moment for emotion. This was a moment for strategy. I realized something important right then. If Camille truly believed she was untouchable, if she believed no one suspected her, she would reveal herself without even realizing it. All I had to do was give her time and space, and the illusion that she was winning. So I did what women like me have done for generations. I observed, I listened, I remembered everything, because predators don't trip when you chase them. They trip when they think they've already crossed the finish line. And Camille, she thought the game was already over. She had no idea it had just begun. If someone exists online only recently, they didn't disappear, they were manufactured. The morning after David mentioned proposing, I didn't cry. I made coffee, strong, black, no sugar, because fear clouds judgment and I couldn't afford that. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table, sunlight barely creeping through the blinds, and told myself one thing. Start simple. People like Camille depend on one dangerous assumption, that no one will ever look closely. That charm is enough. That performance replaces proof. I went straight to Facebook, typed her name, Camille Dubois. There were results. Of course, there were pretty profile picture, tasteful cover photo, smiling, sunlit, carefully curated, but the timeline thin. Posts only went back about a year and a half. No awkward teenage photos, no college-era nonsense. No political rants, no drunk birthday pictures, no embarrassing comments from old friends. Nothing human. I scrolled further. No childhood friends, no cousins, no family tagging her in anything ever. That's when my stomach tightened. Because real people have messy histories, fake ones don't. Next, Instagram, same story, beautiful photos, Paris cafes, neutral captions, minimal engagement, almost no tagged photos from other people. Almost no long-standing friendships. It looked like a lifestyle brand, not a life. Then LinkedIn, hospitality management, Paris, impressive headline, vague descriptions. Company names that sounded legitimate but generic enough to be untraceable. I clicked through. 0 coworkers commenting, 0 endorsements, 0 recommendations. That doesn't happen by accident, that happens by design. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen, because here's the truth most people don't want to admit. Social media isn't about connection anymore, it's about continuity, and Camille's continuity didn't exist. She appeared fully formed, polished, educated, charming, like she'd been dropped into the world right on schedule. That's not normal, that's a construction. I started taking screenshots. profiles, dates, gaps, inconsistencies. I made a folder, named it nothing dramatic, just Camille, because the moment you label something as a threat, emotions get involved, and emotions make mistakes. Then my phone rang. David. I hesitated just long enough to steady my voice. Hey, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. He sounded happy. Light in love. We're talking about Christmas plans, he said. Camille's excited to meet more family. I swallowed. That's nice, I said. Pause. I think I'm going to propose. There it was again, like a drumbeat. I figured, I replied calmly. You sound sure. I am, he said. I've never felt this way before. That sentence broke my heart, not because it was foolish, but because it was sincere. I pictured Camille's voice in the kitchen, her laughter on the phone, her timeline. I did the math again. Marriage, immigration, paperwork, 2-year mark exit. She wasn't guessing, she was scheduling. I just wanted you to know, David said. Your blessing matters to me. I closed my eyes. You've always had my support, I said, and the lie slid out smoothly because sometimes love demands deception. After the call ended, I sat very still, then I went back to work. I searched reverse image tools, her photos, original but selectively posted. I checked archived sites. Nothing. I checked language forums, travel boards, employment databases. It was like she'd lived nowhere before arriving everywhere. That's when the thought fully formed in my mind. What if David wasn't the first? What if this wasn't her first family, her first engagement, her first exit plan? The idea made my hands curl into fists. Because if that were true, this wasn't just about protecting my son. This was about stopping a pattern, and patterns don't stop themselves. They rely on silence. They rely on politeness. They rely on people being too uncomfortable to ask hard questions. I wasn't uncomfortable. I was focused. And somewhere between my second cup of coffee and my third screenshot, I realized something chilling. Camille didn't just erase her past, she replaced it, which meant one thing was certain. There was a past, and it was waiting to be found. The moment a professional stops joking, you know you've hit something real. By the third night, I stopped pretending this was just paranoia. Patterns don't lie, gaps don't lie, and instincts, especially the kind sharpened by loss, don't lie. That's when I thought of my niece Claire. Claire works for the State Department, visa services, policy compliance. The kind of job where you learn to read people faster than paperwork. She's sharp, efficient, and impossible to impress, which is exactly who you want when you're afraid of what you might already know. I texted her one sentence, lunch this week. I need your professional brain, not your family heart. She replied 5 minutes later, tomorrow, noon. Don't put anything sensitive in writing. That alone told me something was wrong. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, neutral, unremarkable, the kind of place where no one listens because everyone assumes no one important ever meets there. Claire arrived exactly on time. Navy blazer, minimal makeup. Eyes already scanning the room before she sat down. So, she said, opening her menu without looking at it. What's going on? I didn't rush. I told her everything, from the first dinner to the phone call in French to the timelines to the social media gaps. I slid my phone across the table and let her scroll through the screenshots I'd taken. She didn't interrupt, didn't gasp, didn't shake her head, didn't reassure me. She just listened. That scared me more than panic ever could. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. There's a manual for this, she said. I blinked. A manual? Oh yeah, she replied. Not a literal book, but patterns, scripts, timelines. We see them over and over. She pulled out her phone and tapped a few times. Marriage fraud isn't impulsive, she continued. It's operational. She turned the screen toward me. A checklist, rushed romance. Heavy age or financial imbalance, heavy thin or manufactured background, heavy emotional manipulation, heavy foreign accent paired with savior complex. Heavy, 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 she's textbook, Claire said quietly. Not amateur, professional. The word landed heavy. My stomach dropped. So what do? I asked. This time, Claire didn't answer immediately. She looked at me, really looked like she was deciding how much truth I could handle. Then she said, you prepare for the possibility that she's done this before. Before, the word echoed, other sons, other families, other homes opened with trust and closed with damage. She may not even use the same name every time, Claire continued. Different cities, different timelines, same outcome. I felt something shift inside me, something colder than fear, anger, because this wasn't just about David anymore. This wasn't about a bad girlfriend or a misunderstanding. This was predation. She knows the system, Claire said. She knows what questions get asked. She knows how long she needs to stay married. She knows when to leave. So how do you stop someone like that? I asked. Claire didn't hesitate. You gather evidence, she said. Quietly, legally, methodically. She leaned forward, and you don't tip her off. Because the moment she senses danger, she disappears and resurfaces somewhere else. I nodded slowly. What about David? I asked. Claire's voice softened just slightly. He has to see it himself. Or it won't stick. That was the hardest part, because every instinct in me wanted to grab my son and shake him awake. But Claire was right. Truth only works when the person is ready to receive it. Before we left, Claire gave me one final warning. Be careful, she said. People who live double lives are very good at protecting themselves. I smiled. So am I. On the drive home, I felt strangely calm, focused. Because now I knew something Camille didn't. She wasn't dealing with a suspicious mother anymore. She was dealing with someone who understood the rules and understood how to use them. This wasn't about revenge. This was about containment. Because parasites don't stop on their own. They move on unless someone cuts them off. And I had already decided Camille wouldn't be moving on quietly. The scariest people in the room never look scary. If you've ever watched crime shows, you expect investigators to look a certain way. Trench coats, hard eyes, sharp voices, a presence that announces danger before a word is spoken. Marcus Webb looked like none of that. Mid-S, calm posture, soft-spoken, polite to a fault. The kind of man you'd trust with your taxes or ask for grilling advice on a Sunday afternoon. No flashy clothes, no intimidating energy. No ego, and that's when I knew he was the real deal. Because the people who actually know how to uncover the truth don't need to advertise it. We met in my kitchen mid-morning. I offered him coffee. He declined sugar. Not rudely, efficiently, like someone who minimizes variables in everything he does. He sat at the table, hands folded, eyes steady, taking in the room without staring. The best investigations, he said casually, lifting his cup, are the ones nobody knows are happening. That sentence alone told me I'd made the right call. I didn't waste time. I slid my phone across the table, a photo of Camille frozen mid-smile. I think my son is being set up. Marcus looked at the picture. No raised eyebrows, no dramatic reaction, no surprise. He studied it the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. Then he asked one question. How long has she been in the country? 8 months. That was it. Just a pause, small, almost invisible. But something changed in his expression, not alarm, not shock, recognition. Yeah, he said quietly, that's not random. My chest tightened. He set the phone down carefully. She entered on a tourist visa, Marcus continued, his tone neutral, listed a short-term rental as her address. He tapped the table once, vacated it after 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The number landed like a punch. Because 6 weeks ago was exactly when Camille randomly met my son. She didn't come to visit, Marcus said flatly. She came to shop. I felt my throat go dry. Marcus leaned back slightly, still calm, still controlled. People like her don't improvise, he explained. They plan routes, cities, timelines. They arrive with intent. He took a sip of coffee. Your son wasn't unlucky, he added. He was selected. That word stayed with me, selected. Like a product pulled from a shelf. Marcus continued, laying out facts the way some people lay out cutlery, neat, precise, unavoidable. She chose Austin because it's stable, growing economy, high percentage of professionals. Men with assets who aren't flashy. That was David. She used dating apps with location filters, he said, filtered for age, education, and income markers. My hands clenched in my lap. This isn't romance, Marcus said. It's targeting. I stared at the photo again. The smile that fooled my son, the accent that disarmed rooms, the warmth that wasn't warmth at all. What happens next? I asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at my quiet street, the kind of street people trust. That depends, he said finally, on whether you want to protect your son quietly or stop her completely. I swallowed. Because I already knew the answer, even if I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Marcus turned back to me. If we keep digging, he said, you may not like what we find. I met his eyes. Dig, I said. And that was the moment this stopped being a suspicion and became an investigation. When lies pile up, they don't collapse, they form a pattern. Marcus didn't dramatize what he was about to show me. He didn't warn me to sit down. Didn't soften his voice, didn't say things like, you might want to prepare yourself. He simply opened his folder. And that's when I understood something important. This wasn't a hunch. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't even bad luck. This was organized. Inside the folder were printed pages, clean, labeled, time-stamped. Marcus didn't rush. He laid them out one by one like puzzle pieces he already knew how to assemble. First, screenshots, dating apps. Multiple ones, not just the app David met her on, but others. Some inactive, some recently deleted, same photos, same angles, same bio structure, different names, same woman. She rotates platforms, Marcus explained calmly. Different apps attract different types of men, he pointed to highlighted sections. Career-driven, recently divorced, emotionally open, stable income, my stomach twisted. She studies targets, he continued. Social media, interests. Emotional gaps, what makes them feel seen? Next page, forum posts, immigration discussion boards, threads about marriage visas, timelines, interview strategies, questions asked in fluent English and answered in French. How long before divorce raises red flags? What documentation matters most? How to avoid suspicion during the 2-year period? 2 years, again. A coincidence doesn't repeat itself this cleanly. Then came messages. Printed transcripts, Camille, or whatever name she was using, messaging multiple American men. Same structure, same emotional beats, same compliments, different names dropped in the blanks. You seem so genuine. I've never felt safe like this before. I think fate brought us together. I felt physically sick because David had shown me messages like that. I'd thought they were special. They're not copy-paste, Marcus said, reading my face. They're templated, adjusted just enough to feel personal. Then he turned the page and hit me where it hurt. The company she claims she worked for in Paris, he said. It shut down 3 years ago. He slid over a business registry document. Closed, liquidated, no employees. The references David checked, Marcus continued. Fake numbers, voice recordings. Scripted responses. He tapped the paper lightly. She even trained the voices to sound older, authoritative, trustworthy. That wasn't improvisation, that was rehearsal. Then Marcus paused, and I knew whatever came next was worse. He slid 2 photos across the table. The first made my breath catch. Camille standing outside a courthouse in Nevada, her arm looped around a man in his early 40s, both smiling, marriage license visible in the background. Different hair, different style, same face. The second photo came from a wedding announcement archived online. Colorado, different man, different last name, same woman. Both marriages ended quietly, both before 2 years. Both men lost money, both women vanished. She's done this at least twice, Marcus said evenly, and that's just what we can prove quickly. My hands trembled. My son is next, I whispered. Marcus nodded once. She's not dating him, he said. She's processing him. That word, processing, like paperwork, like inventory, like a system moving someone from entry to exit. I thought of David's smile, the way he talked about the future. The ring he was probably already shopping for. This isn't emotional, Marcus added. It's logistical. She follows the same arc every time. Meet, bond, accelerate, marry, wait, extract, disappear. She doesn't hate these men, he said. She doesn't care enough to hate them. That might have been the most disturbing part. I stared at the photos again. How does no one catch her? I asked. Marcus folded his hands. Because people assume patterns are coincidences, he said. And because no one wants to believe they were chosen for the wrong reasons. Silence settled between us, heavy, final, because now there was no maybe, no benefit of the doubt, no hope that I'd misunderstood. This woman hadn't stumbled into my son's life. She had entered it deliberately, and the clock was still ticking. The moment you realize you're not dealing with a liar, you're dealing with a system. Marcus didn't rush the next part. That alone terrified me. People rush when they're unsure. They hesitate when they're afraid of being wrong. Marcus did neither. He leaned forward slightly, lowered his voice, and said, "There's more you need to understand." The room felt smaller. Camille isn't operating alone. I felt my chest tighten. What do you mean, not alone? I asked. Marcus exhaled slowly. People like her don't freelance, he said. They plug into networks. He opened his folder again, a second section I hadn't seen yet. This one was thicker, more organized, more damning. She has support, he continued. Fake parents who show up on video calls. Fake employers who confirm job histories. Fake landlords who validate addresses. I stared at the documents. And real lawyers, Marcus added quietly. Real accountants, real immigration consultants. That stopped me cold. These people don't break the law outright, he explained. They skate the edges. They know exactly what paperwork passes scrutiny and what triggers audits. I felt sick. This wasn't a romance scam. This was infrastructure. She didn't invent her backstory, Marcus said. She was issued one. He slid over a printed timeline, arrival date, dating app activation, relationship escalation, family integration, engagement window, all mapped, all intentional. She's already planning the next phase, Marcus said. Her parents will visit. Emotional bonding increases. Engagement follows fast. I swallowed. Wedding by New Year, he added. My heart started pounding. David had mentioned Christmas proposals. This woman wasn't guessing, she was executing. And David? I asked, though part of me didn't want the answer. Marcus didn't soften it. He's fully hooked. I looked away toward the window. I imagined my son rehearsing a proposal in his head, smiling to himself, believing he'd finally won love, stability, a future that made sense, and all of it was built on lies. What happens after the wedding? I asked quietly. Marcus tapped the table once. She slows down, becomes distant, maybe blames stress, maybe creates conflict, enough to justify emotional separation without triggering suspicion. He paused. 2 years pass. There it was again. Then she files for divorce, he continued. Cites irreconcilable differences, leaves with status, assets, and a clean record. And David? I asked. Marcus met my eyes. He'll blame himself. That broke something inside me. Because my son had always done that, taken responsibility for other people's damage. I felt anger rise, sharp, focused, dangerous. This isn't a con, I said. Marcus nodded. It's a business built on charm. On vulnerability, on men who wanted love more than they wanted proof. How many? I asked. Marcus hesitated. We don't know, he said honestly. That's the problem with systems like this. They only surface when someone refuses to play along. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. And if we do nothing, I asked. Marcus didn't sugarcoat it. She marries your son, he said. She gets what she wants, she leaves. And she moves on to the next target. I clenched my jaw, and if we act, Marcus studied me carefully. That depends on your goal, he leaned forward. You can stop the marriage, he said, or he let the word hang. Or you can end her career. The room went quiet. I felt the weight of that choice settle in my chest. Stopping the marriage would save David, but she'd vanish, rebrand, and destroy another family. Ending her career would mean exposure. Legal consequences, collateral damage. It would mean stepping into a fight I hadn't asked for, but I didn't hesitate. I knew the answer instantly. I want both, I said. Marcus nodded slowly, not surprised. Then we do this carefully, he said, because once she realizes the board has changed, she'll fight back. I smiled. So will I, because Camille had made one fatal mistake. She thought she'd targeted a loving mother. She didn't realize she'd awakened a strategist. And the scariest thing about this, I was just getting started. If someone's lying, don't interrupt them, let them perform. The doorbell rang exactly at 6 p.m., not early, not late, right on time. That detail alone told me more than Camille realized. People who arrive precisely on schedule aren't being polite, they're being controlled. Timing matters when you're executing a plan. I opened the door, already composed, already smiling. Camille stood on my porch glowing with confidence, dressed elegantly but not extravagantly, the kind of outfit that says taste, not money. She had positioned herself perfectly between two older adults, a man and a woman who looked like they'd stepped out of a casting call. They were impeccable. The man was tall, silver-haired, posture straight, wearing a neutral blazer that screamed European understatement. The woman beside him wore soft colors, pearl earrings, and a warm smile that felt practiced but convincing. Camille beamed. Mrs. Thompson, she said sweetly, I'd like you to meet my parents, Henry and Margaret Dubois. Henry took my hand and kissed it gently, just long enough to feel charming without being awkward. Margaret stepped forward and hugged me immediately, not too tight, not too distant. Familiar but respectful, perfect accents, perfect manners, perfect pacing. They complimented my home, they commented on the weather. They thanked me for welcoming them. Every word landed exactly where it was meant to, and right then a calm certainty settled over me. These were not her parents. These were professionals, not because they were rude, not because they were sloppy, but because they were too good. Real parents are messy. They interrupt each other. They overcorrect details. They carry emotional fingerprints that can't be faked. These two, they were polished like a presentation. I welcomed them inside, offered wine, gestured toward the living room. They moved as a unit, like they'd rehearsed spacing and eye contact. Camille watched me carefully, not anxiously, strategically. She was measuring. So I did the one thing she wasn't prepared for. I spoke French, bad French, rusty French, but real French. I'm sorry for my pronunciation, I said with a gentle laugh. It's been many years since I've spoken it regularly. The effect was immediate. Margaret smiled politely. Henry nodded, but Camille, her eyes flickered, just for half a second. Fear, not confusion, not surprise, fear. Because in that instant, everything shifted. The performance had been designed for an audience that didn't understand the language, someone who would smile, nod, and miss the nuances. But now they had to adjust. Henry recovered quickly, complimenting my effort. Margaret laughed warmly and said it was very good, too generous, which told me she was trying to put me at ease. Camille stepped in immediately, redirecting the conversation, laughing a little louder than necessary. She was reasserting control. Dinner preparations continued, and I let them talk. That was the key. I didn't challenge, I didn't probe. I didn't correct, I listened, because liars don't fail when they're questioned. They fail when they're comfortable. They start filling silence. They start adding details. They start improvising. And improvisation is where truth collapses. As we moved toward the dining room, I noticed how often Camille glanced at her parents. Subtle cues, micro-adjustments, silent checks for alignment. That's not how families communicate. That's how teams do. I poured wine. They praised the selection. They praised the food. They praised my son. Everything was praise, which is another red flag. Real people criticize at least one thing. As we sat down, I caught Camille watching me again, not with suspicion, but with calculation. She thought she'd recovered. She thought the moment had passed. She didn't realize that by revealing fear, even for half a second, she'd already lost something important. Because now I knew for certain this wasn't just Camille improvising. This was an operation, and I had just stepped inside the control room. Liars don't fail on big details, they fail on the small ones. Dinner unfolded like theater. The kind with good lighting, perfect pacing, and actors who knew their marks. Wine was poured, compliments were exchanged. Camille stayed radiant, perched just close enough to David to look devoted but independent. Henry sat upright, hands folded, speaking only when prompted. Margaret smiled constantly, nodding in agreement even before sentences finished. They were synchronized, too synchronized. Henry began talking about his years teaching in Marseille. I taught literature, he said in French accented English, voice smooth and practiced. Very rewarding, young minds, generic, safe. The kind of description you get from a brochure. I nodded, smiled, and kept eating. Marseille is beautiful, I said casually. Very different rhythm than Paris. Henry agreed quickly, too quickly. Yes, yes, completely different, slower. Coastal, he launched into a description of the port, but his details were vague. No street names, no specific schools, no personal anecdotes. People who have lived somewhere don't speak in outlines, they speak in memories. Margaret jumped in, describing her work with the government. Administrative, she said. Long hours, important responsibility. 5 minutes later, she referenced a different department entirely, one that didn't exist during the years she claimed to work there. Camille subtly cleared her throat. Correction cue, Margaret adjusted. The rhythm recovered, but I noticed. Then the mistake they didn't realize I was waiting for. Henry and Margaret began speaking to each other in French, fast, casual. Confident, they assumed I'd been bluffing earlier. Margaret leaned toward him slightly and said, Si plat est fade. This food is bland. Henry replied without hesitation, Au moins le vin en est pas mauvais. Le fromage me manque. At least the wine isn't bad. I miss proper cheese. Their cadence changed. Their slang shifted. Their references drifted. Paris, not Marseille. Parisian rhythm. Parisian phrasing. Parisian impatience. Marseille French carries warmth, musicality, a southern looseness. This was clipped, efficient, urban. I kept my face neutral, smiled, cut another bite of roast. Then Camille leaned toward them and whispered in French, sharp, controlled, urgent. She's harmless but not stupid. Stay consistent. We're almost done. Almost done. The phrase landed like ice water, not almost engaged, not almost family, almost done as in. Parents approved, mother charmed, proposal, imminent immigration phase, unlocked. My son wasn't a person in that sentence. He was a milestone. I looked at David, laughing, relaxed, completely unaware that his life was being discussed like a transaction across the table. I watched Camille watch him, her smile softened when she looked at him, not with love, with satisfaction. The rest of dinner continued smoothly. They recovered beautifully. That's the danger with professionals. They don't panic when they slip, they adjust. Margaret asked about my late husband, expressing condolences with just enough emotion to seem sincere. Henry praised David's career choices. Camille played translator when it suited her, subtly controlling which parts of the conversation stayed in English and which stayed hidden. But it was too late, the damage was done, because once you hear a lie spoken casually, without fear, you recognize it for what it is. This wasn't a family dinner, this was a performance review, and Camille believed she was passing. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't grading her behavior anymore. I was documenting it, because people like her don't get caught by confrontation, they get caught by consistency, and she had just broken hers. When scammers rush, it's because time is running out. After the Dubois family left, the house felt unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that comes after a performance ends and the audience goes home, leaving only the truth behind. David was glowing, not just happy, validated. He stood in the living room, replaying moments from the evening like highlights from a championship game. They're amazing, Mom, he said, shaking his head with a smile. I mean, really amazing. I feel like I gained a whole new family. I watched him carefully. The relaxed shoulders, the boyish grin, the relief in his voice. This wasn't just about Camille anymore. This was about belonging. I kept my face neutral and nodded. They're very polished, I said. He laughed. That's Europe, different culture, different culture. That's what people say when things don't quite add up but feel too good to question. We sat down on opposite ends of the couch. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees, suddenly serious. There's something I want to tell you. My heart slowed, not raced, slowed, because instinct told me what was coming. I'm proposing on Christmas Eve. There it was, Christmas Eve, 8 days away. The date was perfect, emotionally loaded, family-centered, romantic enough to override logic, strategic as hell. Camille hadn't chosen it by accident. My mind immediately reconstructed the timeline she'd whispered at dinner. Parents introduced mother-evaluated engagements, secured holiday optics, locked in. Christmas Eve wasn't just romantic. It was efficient. I forced a smile. That's a beautiful night, I said softly. David's eyes lit up. I knew you'd say that. Camille wants it to feel magical. She says holidays bring people together. I nodded again, feeling something harden in my chest. Magic is very useful when you're trying to distract people from paperwork. I already have the ring, he continued. I've been hiding it in my desk. I pictured it instantly, still in its box, full of hope, carrying promises Camille had already planned to break. She'll say yes, he said confidently. Of course she would. She'd been saying yes since the day she landed in this country. After David went home, I stood alone in the kitchen for a long time. I didn't cry, I didn't pace. I pulled out my calendar. 8 days. 8 days until a public proposal. 8 days until social media announcements. 8 days until momentum became nearly impossible to stop, and that's when the truth crystallized. Camille hadn't just underestimated me, she had accelerated, because people only rush when something is closing in on them. Her parents' visit wasn't about bonding, it was about locking the deal before questions started forming. Before timelines overlapped, before the past caught up, she thought I was just an old woman happy to be included. She thought politeness meant compliance. She thought silence meant ignorance. Instead, she'd handed me the most valuable thing in any investigation, a deadline, and deadlines change everything. Because now I didn't have to guess, I didn't have to wait, I knew exactly when to strike and how much pressure she was under. That night, I made 3 phone calls, one to Marcus, one to Claire, and one to someone Camille never expected would be involved. I didn't tell David, not yet, because the truth doesn't work when it's dropped like a bomb. It works when it unfolds so clearly that denial becomes impossible. Camille believed Christmas Eve would be her victory lap. She believed love and tradition would shield her. She believed the hardest part was over. She was wrong. Because Christmas Eve wasn't the end of her plan, it was the beginning of mine. Once the timeline is exposed, the game is over. Someone just doesn't know it yet. The minute David left that night, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't pace the house or collapse into a chair. Because panic is what happens when you still think you're powerless. I wasn't. I picked up my phone. Marcus, I said calmly, she just gave us the date. There was no confusion on the other end. No, what do you mean? No hesitation. Just silence. Then he said, which date? Christmas Eve. Another pause, longer this time, then something unexpected. Good, Marcus said. Good. Such a small word for something so final. That gives us leverage. Leverage. A word that sounds clean, mechanical, almost harmless. But leverage means pressure. It means force applied at the right angle, and pressure changes outcomes. By the time the sun came up, I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. I'd reached that strange state where adrenaline replaces rest and clarity replaces fear. At 8:12 a.m., Marcus was back at my dining table. Not casually, prepared, folders spread across the wood like evidence exhibits. Printed charts, timelines, financial trails, immigration entries highlighted in yellow. This wasn't a theory anymore, it was a case. She's accelerating, Marcus said, tapping one of the documents. That's not confidence. That's urgency. He slid a timeline toward me. Arrival date, relationship initiation, parental introduction, engagement window, all compressed. All scammers speed up when something disrupts their rhythm, he continued. Either someone spooked her or she knows time is running out. I didn't respond, I just smiled. Yeah, me, because Camille didn't accelerate out of love. She accelerated because she sensed resistance, not overt, not obvious, but enough to trigger instinct. Predators don't need proof of danger, they just need the feeling of it. She knows something changed, Marcus said. She just doesn't know what. He looked up at me. That's our advantage. He began laying things out carefully. Not emotionally, strategically. She believes Christmas Eve locks everything in, he said. Family, optics, momentum. He tapped the calendar. She thinks once the ring is on her finger, you won't stop it. He was right, most people wouldn't. Most people freeze when things go public. I didn't, because the moment Camille revealed her deadline, she surrendered control of the board. She showed us where the finish line was, and that meant we could choose when and how to intervene. What happens if we do nothing? I asked. Marcus didn't flinch. She gets engaged, papers start moving, she becomes harder to remove cleanly. And if we act before? I asked. He leaned back. Then everything she's built collapses at once. He didn't say how, not yet, because there are moments where you don't need details, you need certainty. And I had it. I looked down at the table, at the evidence of a woman who thought she'd engineered the perfect plan. She hadn't accounted for one thing, a mother who doesn't panic, a mother who doesn't rush, a mother who understands that timing beats force every time. She thinks Christmas Eve is her victory lap, I said quietly. Marcus nodded. Which makes it the perfect moment. I exhaled slowly. For the first time since this started, I felt something other than fear, control, because once the timeline is exposed, the game is already over. The only question left is who realizes it first. And Camille, she was still smiling. Scammers love romance, they hate paperwork. Marcus didn't slide the card across the table dramatically. He placed it there calmly, face up, centered like a chess piece that had been waiting off the board until now. Agent Sarah Chen, ice the name alone made my pulse slow instead of spike, because chaos panics people. Procedure terrifies them. She's already been flagged, Marcus said evenly. That sentence landed heavier than anything else he'd told me so far. Flagged, I repeated. He nodded. Not arrested, not confronted. But noticed, he opened another folder, thinner, darker, more serious. Multiple identity markers, he continued. Slight name variations, reused photos, marriage-related activity across state lines. I felt my chest tighten. So she's not invisible, I said. No, Marcus replied. She's just been careful, careful enough to survive, not careful enough to stop. Agent Chen arrived the next afternoon. No uniform, no badge on display. No intimidation tactics. She looked like someone you'd sit next to at a PTA meeting or run into at the grocery store. Early 30s, sharp eyes, calm posture, a presence that didn't demand attention, it commanded it. She shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "thank you for coming forward." Coming forward, not accusing, not reporting, forward. We sat at my dining table, the same one where Camille had smiled, lied, and plotted. Agent Chen didn't rush. She asked for confirmation of facts Marcus already knew. Dates, locations, names, conversations. She took notes by hand, not on a laptop, and that detail mattered more than people realize. When she finished, she leaned back slightly and said something that chilled me. "This isn't a romance scam." I blinked. "It's immigration fraud with emotional leverage," she clarified. "The relationships are tools, not the goal." I swallowed. "And how serious is that?" I asked. Agent Chen didn't soften her answer. "Felony level serious," she said, "especially when it crosses state lines and involves multiple fraudulent marriages." The room went quiet. "She's part of a larger pattern," Agent Chen continued. "We've been tracking similar cases for years, same structure, same timelines, same exit strategy." I clenched my hands together. "So what happens now?" Agent Chen looked directly at me. "She walks into your house thinking she's about to get engaged," she said calmly, "and walks out in handcuffs." The words echoed, handcuffs, not exposed, not embarrassed, arrested. Silence filled the room, then I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What about my son?" Agent Chen didn't dodge it. "He's going to be hurt," she said. "He's going to be angry, probably at you first." That part didn't surprise me. Truth rarely gets thanked at the beginning. But she continued, "He'll be alive, solvent, and free." Alive, as if the alternative had been very real. "And the marriage?" I asked. "There won't be one," she said. "There won't even be an engagement." My throat tightened. "Will she know?" I asked. "Before it happens?" Agent Chen shook her head. "No," she said. "Surprise is essential. The moment she senses intervention, she disappears." I nodded slowly. "Christmas Eve," Marcus added. "Public setting, family present, emotional distraction." Agent Chen agreed. "Perfect," she said. "She'll be focused on optics, not exits." I looked down at the table. At the place where David would soon stand, ring in hand, believing he was about to propose to the love of his life. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Agent Chen met my eyes. "Normalcy," she said. "No warnings, no changes." "No hesitation," I laughed softly. "I've been acting normal my whole life," I said. "I can manage one more night." She smiled, just barely. "Good," she said, "because once this starts, it doesn't stop." As Agent Chen stood to leave, she paused. "One more thing," she said. "Yes, you did the right thing," she said quietly. "Most families don't catch this until it's too late." I nodded, because catching it wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was pretending everything was fine, knowing that in just days, the life my son thought he was building would collapse. But collapse is better than captivity. And love built on lies isn't love at all, it's theft. The best traps don't look like traps, they look like celebrations. Christmas Eve preparations began like nothing was wrong, that was the point. The house smelled like pot roast and rosemary, the same recipe my mother used, the same one David associated with safety and tradition. Grandma's china came down from the cabinet, each plate placed carefully, deliberately, like props on a stage that had already been rehearsed. Candles were set, the table was dressed, gifts were wrapped. Even the ones that would never be opened. I moved slowly, methodically, doing everything exactly the way I always had, because deviation creates suspicion, and suspicion creates questions. Questions were the last thing we wanted. David called mid-afternoon, voice buzzing with nervous excitement. "I've got the ring, Mom," he said. "Tonight's the night." The ring, my mother's ring. 4 generations of women who loved fiercely, endured quietly, and protected what mattered. A ring Camille had already priced out in her head. I had to sit down for a moment after that call, not because I was weak, but because the weight of it pressed hard against my ribs. The idea that something sacred had nearly been pawned off by a criminal made my vision blur. But I didn't cry. I didn't let myself, because tears cloud timing, and timing was everything. At 5:30 p.m., I checked the house one last time. Nothing out of place, nothing unusual, nothing that suggested tonight would be anything other than festive. At 5:45 p.m., the doorbell rang, right on time. I opened the door to find Agent Sarah Chen standing on my porch. No uniform, no badge visible, just a tasteful coat, neutral makeup, and the relaxed posture of someone attending a family gathering. "Ready?" she asked softly. I nodded. She stepped inside, blending into the background with the ease of someone trained to disappear in plain sight. She took a seat near the living room window, where she could see both entrances without looking like she was watching anything at all. Marcus arrived shortly after, not together, not coordinated, because nothing raises alarms faster than patterns. We exchanged brief glances. No words, we all knew the script. At 6:10 p.m., Camille arrived, radiant. She wore a soft dress, elegant, understated, designed to look timeless in photos she expected would live forever online. Her smile was bright, her posture confident. She believed she was walking into a proposal. She believed she was about to secure her future. She kissed my cheek warmly. "Merry Christmas Eve," she said. "Merry Christmas," I replied. Behind her, David followed, nervous, glowing, hand brushing his jacket pocket every few seconds. The ring was in there, I could feel it. The house filled with conversation and laughter. Camille played her role flawlessly, affectionate, attentive, perfectly positioned beside David at all times. She laughed a little louder than usual, touched his arm a little more often. Not out of love, out of anticipation. She was almost done. Agent Chen watched quietly, sipping wine, nodding politely when spoken to. Camille registered her presence but dismissed it immediately. Another family friend, another harmless observer. That was her mistake. At exactly 6:42 p.m., David cleared his throat. My heart thudded once, hard. "Everyone," he said, standing. "I just want to say something." Camille's eyes widened. Her smile froze, not with surprise, but with satisfaction. This was the moment she'd rehearsed. She turned toward him, hand already lifting, ready to cry, ready to say yes. That's when Agent Chen stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just stood. "Camille Dubois," she said calmly. "My name is Sarah Chen." Camille blinked. Confusion flickered, then calculation. "I'm with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement," Agent Chen continued, her voice steady. "I need you to come with me." Silence slammed into the room. David turned pale. "What is this?" Camille asked, laughing nervously. "This is a joke, yes." Agent Chen shook her head. "Ma'am, you are being detained in connection with multiple counts of immigration fraud, identity falsification, and conspiracy." Camille's face drained of color. She looked at me, not angry, not pleading, shocked, because in that moment she realized something crucial. She hadn't misjudged my intelligence, she had misjudged my patience. David's voice broke. "Mom, what's happening?" I stood slowly. Steadily, "This is what love looks like," I said quietly. "Protection." Camille opened her mouth to speak, but for the first time since I'd met her, no words came out, because performers fall apart when the curtain drops. Agent Chen gently took Camille's arm, and just like that, the future Camille had planned evaporated. No proposal, no ring, no green card, no escape, only consequences. As the door closed behind them, I felt my knees finally weaken, but I stayed standing, because this wasn't the end, it was the truth. And truth, no matter how painful, is always better than the lie you almost lived forever. The scariest confidence is the kind that has no idea it's already lost. 6 o'clock on the dot, not 5:59, not 6:02, exactly 6. David's car pulled into the driveway, headlights washing briefly over the front of the house like a spotlight hitting a stage. I watched from the living room window, my hands folded calmly in front of me, my pulse steady in a way that surprised even me. David stepped out first. He straightened his jacket, checked his reflection in the car window, then patted his pocket once, twice, like a nervous teenager making sure the ring was still there. Hope does that to people. Then Camille stepped out. Red dress, perfectly fitted. Hair styled just loose enough to look natural, just polished enough to look intentional. She laughed at something David said, leaned in, kissed him on the cheek. She looked untouchable. That's what confidence looks like when it's fed by certainty, certainty that the future is already secured. Inside, Agent Sarah Chen sat on the living room couch, legs crossed, casually flipping through a magazine like she'd been there 100 times before. No tension in her posture, no urgency in her movements. That was the point. Danger never announces itself. I stepped back from the window as the front door opened. Camille entered first, warm air and perfume following her inside. She leaned in and kissed my cheek lightly. "Mrs. Thompson," she said softly, "you look radiant tonight." Her voice was smooth, relaxed, triumphant. This was liar's confidence, the kind that comes when someone believes every variable has already been controlled. When resistance feels impossible, when the finish line is visible. "Oh, Camille," I replied with a smile that didn't shake. "Tonight's special." She smiled back, unaware of the weight behind those words. David followed her in, practically glowing. He looked around the house like he was seeing it for the first time, the candles, the table set carefully, the warmth. Everything felt safe to him. That was the cruelest part. We moved into the dining room together. Camille slipped seamlessly into her seat beside David, hand resting on his arm, posture angled toward him like a living promise. Agent Chen remained in the living room, visible but unremarkable, just another presence. Another background detail Camille registered and dismissed without thought, because predators don't fear what looks ordinary. Dinner began. Normal conversation, comfortable rhythms, familiar sounds of plates and silverware. David talked about trips he wanted to take, about houses he'd looked at online, about someday. Camille played her role flawlessly. She nodded. She laughed at the right moments. She squeezed his hand just enough to anchor him emotionally, but I watched her closely. The confidence was still there, but it had edges now, tiny ones. She glanced toward the living room once, then again. Just a flicker. Instinct doesn't need facts, it only needs change. Agent Chen hadn't done anything unusual. That's what made it dangerous. Camille's smile never dropped, but it tightened almost imperceptibly. Her shoulders stayed relaxed, but her posture adjusted, subtly angled toward the door. She was beginning to scan, not consciously, professionally, the kind of scanning that happens when a person who lives by deception senses disruption in the pattern. She didn't know what was wrong, she only knew something was. I took a slow sip of water and watched her across the table. The red dress, the perfect makeup, the woman who thought she'd beaten the system. She had no idea the system was already sitting in the next room. And David, he was smiling, reaching for the future with both hands, unaware that the ground beneath it had already been removed. That's the thing about confidence built on lies. It feels strongest right before it collapses. And Camille, she had never looked more certain. Career liars always feel it before it happens. Dinner continued. That was the unsettling part. Nothing happened, and yet everything was happening. The candles burned steadily, plates were passed, wine was poured. On the surface, it was just another holiday meal, the kind people photograph and remember fondly. David was talking nonstop about trips he wanted to take next year, about houses he'd bookmarked online, about kids, names, schools, backyards, a future he was already living in. Camille mirrored him perfectly. She laughed at the right times, finished his sentences gently, squeezed his hand whenever his voice got too hopeful. If anyone had walked in at that moment, they would have thought they were watching a couple deeply in love. But I wasn't watching the performance. I was watching the cracks. Camille's eyes kept drifting, not obviously, not nervously, but repeatedly toward the living room, toward Agent Chen. At first, it looked like nothing, a casual glance, a momentary distraction. Then it happened again and again. Instinct doesn't shout, it whispers. Agent Chen hadn't moved. She sat comfortably, magazine open, occasionally turning a page, no eye contact, no pressure, no signal. And yet Camille's body was reacting. Her shoulders tightened slightly. Her posture shifted just enough to angle toward the exit, her foot repositioned under the table. Fight or flight doesn't need logic, it only needs threat. Agent Chen finally spoke, casually, conversationally, like a neighbor joining in. "So Camille," she said lightly, "how long have you been in the States now?" Camille didn't hesitate. 8 months, she replied instantly, too instantly. Real memories require retrieval. Lies are preloaded. David smiled proudly as if that answer meant something good. Agent Chen nodded, flipping a page in her magazine. "And your visa status?" she asked, still relaxed. Camille smiled wider than before. "Tourist," she said. "I'm in the process of adjusting." Adjusting, the word hovered in the air. David didn't notice. I did, so did Agent Chen. Adjusting wasn't just an answer, it was a tell, because innocent people say applying, professionals say adjusting. Camille shifted in her chair, crossed her legs the other direction. Her hand tightened around her fork, then loosened again. Still smiling, always smiling. "I think maybe we should head out soon," Camille said suddenly, voice light but insistent. "It's getting late." It wasn't, not even close. David blinked. "Already? But dessert," she cut him off gently, touching his arm. "You've had a long day, love." Her tone was affectionate. Her body language was urgent. She wanted out. That was the moment her confidence fractured, because liars don't leave early unless they sense danger. Agent Chen closed the magazine, slowly, deliberately. "Before anyone leaves," she said calmly, standing, "I should probably introduce myself properly." The room changed. Not explosively, not dramatically, but unmistakably, like pressure shifting before a storm. Camille froze just for half a second. Her smile stayed, but it stopped evolving. It became fixed, mechanical, like a mask locked in place. David looked between them, confused. "Introduce yourself," he asked. "I thought." Agent Chen met Camille's eyes, not aggressively, not triumphantly, professionally, the kind of look that doesn't accuse, it knows. Camille's instincts were no longer whispering. They were screaming. Her foot slid back under the chair, her shoulders squared, her breath changed, slower, deeper. She was preparing for denial, for deflection, for escape. Every survival skill she'd ever learned was lining up in her body. She still didn't know exactly what was coming, but she knew the pattern had broken. And once patterns break, liars don't improvise, they transform. The accent disappears when the truth arrives. Agent Chen reached into her jacket calmly. No rush, no drama. She pulled out her badge and held it at chest level, not shoved forward, not waved around, just visible enough to remove all doubt. "Agent Sarah Chen," she said evenly, "U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement." The room went silent, not the awkward silence of a bad joke, the kind that presses against your ears. Camille didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't gasp. She straightened slowly, deliberately, and then something remarkable happened. Her accent vanished. "I don't know what this is about," she said, perfect, unaccented American English. "My documents are clean." David froze. The shift was so abrupt it felt unreal, like watching someone change masks mid-sentence. The woman who had charmed him with soft vowels and foreign warmth was gone. This was someone else, controlled, sharp, alert. David looked at her like he didn't recognize her. "What is this?" he asked, voice cracking as he turned to me. "Mom." Agent Chen stepped forward slightly and placed a small stack of photos on the table: courthouses, marriage licenses, wedding announcements, different cities, different men, different names, same woman. She slid the photos toward David gently, not like evidence, but like facts. "Mr. Thompson," Agent Chen said softly, "the woman you know as Camille Dubois is actually Christina Marsh." Camille's jaw tightened. "She is wanted for marriage fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy," Agent Chen continued, "across 7 states. David stared down at the table. His hands trembled. "No," he whispered. "That's not." The ring box slipped from his fingers. Clack. The sound echoed unnaturally loud. That sound wasn't plastic hitting wood. It was a life cracking open. Camille laughed, not nervously, not defensively, amused. A cold, humorless sound that carried no warmth at all. "Oh, David," she said flatly, "you really believed this was real?" He looked up at her, eyes glassy, searching for anything familiar. "You said you loved me." She tilted her head slightly, studying him not with guilt, not with regret, but with evaluation. "I did what I needed to do," she replied. "That's not the same thing." Something broke in him then. I saw it in his shoulders, in the way he folded inward, like a child realizing the world isn't safe the way he thought it was. Agent Chen stepped closer to Camille. "Christina Marsh," she said clearly, "you are being detained pending investigation." Camille smirked. "You think this ends me?" she asked calmly. "There are dozens like me." Agent Chen didn't react. "Maybe," she said. "But tonight it ends you." She gently took Camille's arm. Camille didn't resist, didn't plead, didn't look back at David. She looked at me, not with anger, not with hatred, with something closer to disbelief. Because only now did she understand what she'd miscalculated. She hadn't underestimated my intelligence. She had underestimated my resolve. As Agent Chen guided her toward the door, Camille finally spoke again, in French. "Sharp, bitter, you ruined everything," I replied calmly, also in French. "No," I said, "you did." The door closed behind them. The house felt hollow. David sank into a chair, head in his hands. "I was going to marry her," he whispered. I crossed the room and knelt beside him, placing my hands over his. "I know," I said softly. He looked up at me, tears finally breaking free. "I feel so stupid." I shook my head. "No," I said firmly, "you were targeted. That's not stupidity, that's trust." He nodded slowly, trying to breathe. Outside, a car door closed, an engine started, and just like that, the woman who had almost erased my son's future disappeared, not into freedom, but into consequence. But I knew something else too. This wasn't over. People like Camille don't go quietly, and the aftermath, that's where the real damage and the real healing begins. Sometimes the truth isn't forced out, it's delivered for pleasure. For a split second, I thought she might keep lying. I watched her closely as Agent Chen finished speaking, as the photos lay spread across the table like shattered mirrors, as David's hands trembled over a future that no longer existed. Most people, when cornered, default to survival. They cry, they beg, they plead misunderstanding, they become small. That's what amateurs do. Christina Marsh did the opposite. She smiled, not a nervous smile, not a defensive one. A slow, deliberate smile, the kind that doesn't ask for mercy because it doesn't believe mercy applies. A predator's smile. "Oh, David," she said softly, almost tenderly, shaking her head. "You're really not taking this well." The shift was immediate. The warmth drained from the room. The air went thin. My son stared at her like he was looking at a stranger wearing someone else's face, the face he'd kissed, trusted, planned a life with. "Tell them they're wrong," he said, voice breaking as he stood. "Tell them this is a mistake." For a moment, I thought she might feign sympathy. Instead, she reached for her wine glass, took a sip, slow, casual, unbothered. "Why would I do that?" she asked. That was the moment the room broke, not loudly, internally, because that question carried certainty, the kind that comes when someone knows the truth no longer needs protection. David took a step back like he needed distance just to breathe. "I loved you," he said weakly. "I trusted you." Christina studied him with curiosity, not guilt, not regret, curiosity, like he'd just said something fascinating but irrelevant. "That's unfortunate," she replied calmly. Agent Chen shifted slightly, already preparing, but she didn't intervene yet. She was letting it happen, because sometimes the truth does more damage than handcuffs ever could. I watched my son's face as realization crept in, not all at once, but in pieces. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something darker. "How can you just sit there?" he asked. "How can you talk like this?" Christina crossed her legs, posture relaxed. "Because this part is always the same," she said. Shock, denial, bargaining. She glanced at Agent Chen briefly, then back at David. "You're right on schedule, schedule." Even now, she framed his pain as a process, as data, as something predictable, and that's when I understood something important. Christina wasn't unraveling, she was transitioning from performance to honesty. And for someone like her, honesty wasn't a weakness, it was indulgence. She no longer needed David to believe in her. She needed him to understand, not because she cared, but because comprehension was the final confirmation of control. David sank into a chair, hands pressed to his temples. "This isn't real," he whispered. Christina leaned back slightly, watching him the way a scientist watches a reaction. "Oh, it's real," she said. "You just weren't meant to see this part." I felt something tighten in my chest, not fear, not anger, recognition. This was the moment she enjoyed most, not the lies, not the manipulation, but the reveal. Because power to people like her isn't about deception, it's about dominance, and she was savoring every second. Agent Chen took one step closer. Christina didn't look at her. She was still focused on David, on the fracture spreading through him. "I think maybe we should stop," David said faintly, looking toward Agent Chen, toward me, toward anyone who could make this end. Christina tilted her head. "Oh no," she said softly, "now we're finally being honest." And I knew then what came next wouldn't be denial, it wouldn't be excuses, it would be precision. Because the worst people don't lie when they're exposed, they explain. The worst people don't just hurt you, they want you to understand why. Christina didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Cruelty doesn't require volume when precision will do. "You were easy," she said calmly, swirling the wine in her glass like she was evaluating its color. "Lonely, predictable, desperate to feel chosen." The words landed one by one, deliberate and measured. David staggered back as if she'd struck him. "That's not true," he said weakly. "You don't know me." She smiled, not mockingly, not kindly, clinically. "Oh, David," she replied. "I knew you before you knew me." She leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table, suddenly all focus. "I knew you were close with your mother," she continued. "I knew your father's death left a hole you never learned how to talk about. I knew you dated seriously, not casually, and I knew you were tired of starting over." David shook his head. "I told you those things because I trusted you." "No," she corrected. "You told me because I asked the right questions." Each sentence stripped something away. She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "The coffee shop where we met," she said. "I scoped it weeks earlier. Quiet, intellectual crowd, men who read alone." David's breath caught. "The book I was reading," she continued, "purchased because Amazon data said men with your profile love that author." She tapped the table lightly. The accent, trained. The vulnerability, scripted. Agent Chen shifted closer. David didn't see her. He was staring at Christina like she was dismantling him piece by piece because she was. "I played this role so many times," Christina said, shrugging. "I could do it in my sleep." She leaned back, grateful immigrant, intellectual connection, slow burn romance, just enough mystery to feel special. Just enough restraint to feel earned. She smiled. "It works," she said, "every single time." David collapsed into a chair. I watched my son's hands shake as he tried to hold his head together like if he pressed hard enough, he could stop the thoughts from spilling out. "You said you loved me," he whispered. Christina laughed softly. "I don't fall in love," she replied. "I research." The cruelty wasn't accidental, it was instructional. She wanted him to understand that nothing he felt had been spontaneous. That every moment he treasured had been engineered. "You weren't unique," she continued. "You were compatible." David flinched. "I matched you to my timeline," she said matter-of-factly. "Age, income, emotional availability. Family structure," she glanced at me briefly, just long enough to let me know she'd always been watching. "Strong maternal influence," she added. "Usually a problem, in this case, just another variable." My jaw tightened. "You think you're special because you love deeply," Christina said, turning back to David, "but depth just makes extraction easier." Agent Chen placed a hand gently on David's shoulder. "That's enough," she said firmly. Christina waved her off dismissively. "No," she said, "he deserves clarity." She leaned closer to David, her voice lowering. "You want to know the saddest part?" she asked. "You weren't even the hardest one." That broke him. I saw it in his eyes the moment self-blame fully took root. "I did everything right," he whispered. "I know," Christina replied easily. "That's why you were perfect." She stood slowly, stretching like someone finishing a long day's work. "I don't hate you," she added. "I don't even dislike you." She looked around the room. This wasn't personal, it was efficient. Agent Chen stepped in decisively now, reaching for the cuffs. "Christina Marsh," she said. "We're done." Christina smiled again, but this time it wasn't indulgent. It was satisfied, because she'd accomplished what she wanted. She hadn't just been caught, she'd been understood. And understanding to people like her is the final wound. David sat motionless, staring at the table. I moved toward him, but he didn't look up, not yet, because what Christina had taken from him wasn't just trust, it was narrative. The story he told himself about love, about intuition, about who he was in relationships. And rebuilding that would take longer than handcuffs ever could. Even in cuffs, monsters want the last word. Agent Chen stepped in decisively, her hand closing around Christina's arm with professional calm. "Christina Marsh," she said evenly, "turn around." That should have been the end. That's usually where the story stops, the bad person restrained, the danger neutralized, the room allowed to breathe again. But people like Christina don't go quietly, because control is their oxygen. And even when their hands are bound, they look for one last place to sink their teeth. As Agent Chen guided her toward the door, Christina twisted just enough to look back at me. Her face hardened, the smile vanished. What replaced it wasn't fear, it was rage, pure, focused, personal. "You think you won?" she snapped, voice sharp, venomous. "You didn't save him." David flinched. I felt it, that instinctive urge to step between them, to shield him like I had when he was a child. Christina wasn't finished. She turned back toward David, her eyes locking onto him with surgical precision. "Your mommy didn't protect you," she sneered. "She ruined you." David's head snapped up. That was intentional. "She wasn't aiming at me anymore. She was aiming through me. She took away the only woman who ever wanted you," Christina continued, her voice low and cruel. "And now you'll never trust another one." Agent Chen tightened her grip. "Enough," she warned. Christina laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Oh, I'm almost done," she said. She leaned in closer to David, not physically, but emotionally, choosing every word with care. "Every smile will look fake now," she whispered. "Every accent suspicious, every woman too good to be true." David's hands curled into fists. "You'll hear my voice in your head when someone laughs at your jokes," Christina went on. "You'll wonder what they're really after." That one landed. I saw it. Because she wasn't guessing. She knew exactly how this kind of damage lingered. Then she straightened slightly, as if remembering something amusing. "Oh," she added lightly, "by the way, Camille Dubois is real." The room froze. Even Agent Chen paused. Christina smiled again, slow, satisfied. "She's in France," Christina said. "Same age, same profession, same parents." I felt ice crawl up my spine. "I didn't invent her," Christina continued. "I borrowed her." David stared at her, stunned. "I stole her life piece by piece," she said with a grin. "Her name, her resume, her online presence." She tilted her head. "She's probably being questioned by authorities right now," Christina added calmly, "because of you." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not just deception, collateral damage. Agent Chen finally pulled her back fully. "That's enough," she said firmly. The cuffs clicked shut. Click. The sound was sharp, final. Christina didn't struggle, didn't protest. As she was led toward the door, she looked back one last time, not at David, not at me, at the room. At the life she'd almost taken. She smirked, because even now she wanted to believe she'd left something broken behind. The door closed. The house went silent. No music, no movement, no breath that didn't feel too loud. David stood slowly, then stopped. He didn't look at me, not because he blamed me, because he didn't trust anything yet. I waited, didn't rush him, didn't explain, didn't justify, because healing doesn't begin with answers. It begins with space. After a long moment, he spoke. "She knew exactly where to hit," he said quietly. I nodded. "Yes," I replied, "and that tells you everything you need to know about who she really was." He swallowed. "I don't know how to feel," he admitted. "That's okay," I said softly. "You don't have to know yet." Outside, a car engine started, then faded. Christina Marsh was gone. But the damage she tried to leave behind still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. And that's when I understood something important. Catching her wasn't the final battle. Undoing what she tried to poison, that was next. Winning doesn't always feel like victory. The house felt wrong after they left, not quiet, wrong. Christmas candles were still burning, their flames steady and oblivious. Plates of untouched food sat on the table, cooling slowly, like the evening itself hadn't gotten the message that everything was over. I stood in the doorway listening. No sirens, no footsteps, no voices, just the sound of my own breathing in a house that suddenly felt too big. David sat at the table, unmoving, not slumped, not crying, just unplugged. Like someone had pulled the cord on him midlife. I waited, because rushing pain only makes it sharper. Finally, he spoke. "You knew," he said quietly, "and you still let me believe." That sentence cut deeper than anything Christina had said. It wasn't angry, it wasn't loud, it was wounded. I walked closer but didn't touch him. "I was trying to protect you," I said softly. He laughed, not because something was funny, but because something inside him had snapped. "You protected me from losing money," he replied, "but you let me get emotionally nuked." I felt my chest tighten, because he wasn't wrong. Protection comes in different forms, and I'd chosen the one that kept him alive and solvent, not the one that kept his heart intact. He stood suddenly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound echoed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. My mother's ring. 4 generations of women who had loved, endured, survived. He stared at it like it was dangerous, like it had betrayed him. "I was going to give her this," he said quietly, "something that mattered." He closed his hand around it, then opened it again like he couldn't decide whether to keep holding on or let it burn him. "I need space, Mom." The words were calm, final. "I don't know how to feel right now," he added, "and I don't trust my instincts." That hurt, not because he blamed me, but because I knew exactly why he didn't trust himself anymore. "Take all the time you need," I said. "I'll be here." He nodded once, didn't hug me, didn't look back. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, and just like that, he was gone. I stood alone in the living room, staring at the flickering candles. This was supposed to be the moment where everything felt resolved, the villain caught, the danger removed, the future saved, but victory doesn't always come with relief. Sometimes it comes with aftermath. I sat down slowly at the table and let myself feel it, not triumph, not pride, grief. Grief for the version of my son that no longer existed, the one who believed love was simple, intuition was enough, and people meant what they said. I replayed every decision I'd made, every moment I'd stayed quiet, every lie I'd told to protect him, every second I'd waited instead of warning. I told myself I'd done the right thing, and I believed it. But believing something is right doesn't erase the cost. That night, I packed away the Christmas decorations alone. Each ornament felt heavier than it should have. Each candle snuffed out felt like another ending. I didn't sleep much in the days that followed. David didn't call, didn't text, didn't check in, and I understood why. He wasn't angry, he was recalibrating. Because when trust collapses, it doesn't just collapse outward, it collapses inward. It makes you question your judgment, your memories, your ability to read people. And I had been part of that collapse, even if my intentions were pure. Winning had saved him, but it had also broken something between us. And that was the truth no one warns you about. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't bring you closer, it pulls you apart first, and you have to sit in that silence long enough to earn your way back. I didn't know then how or if that would happen. All I knew was this: the monster was gone, but the damage remained. And the hardest part of being right is living with what it costs. Plot twists don't announce themselves, they knock quietly. 2 months passed, not dramatically, not cleanly, just slowly. David stayed distant, polite when we spoke, guarded when we didn't, the kind of distance that isn't punishment, it's self-preservation. I didn't push. Because pushing after trauma doesn't bring people closer. It teaches them to retreat faster. Then one morning an email arrived. Subject line: Camille Dubois, urgent, no emojis, no warmth, no manipulation, just words, short. Direct, frightened, she explained that her identity had been flagged by multiple agencies, that her bank accounts had been frozen, that she'd been questioned by French authorities about crimes she didn't understand. She said her name kept coming up in the United States. She asked one question at the end: "If you are Mrs. Thompson, may I please speak with you?" I stared at the screen for a long time, then I replied. 3 days later, I stood at the arrivals gate of the airport holding a simple white sign: Camille Dubois, no hearts, no explanations, just a name. When she walked through the sliding doors, I knew instantly. This was not Christina. There was no sharp confidence, no scanning eyes, no controlled posture, just a woman in a worn coat dragging a small suitcase, exhaustion etched into her face. Her eyes met mine. She hesitated. Then she smiled, uncertain, hopeful, human. "You're Mrs. Thompson?" she asked. Her accent was real, uneven, unpolished. "Yes," I replied. "I am." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Over coffee, she told me everything: how her identity had been copied piece by piece, how job offers vanished overnight, how friends were questioned, how her mother's chemotherapy appointments were interrupted by police calls. "I don't understand," she said softly, wrapping her hands around the mug like it was the only solid thing left. "Why would someone steal my life?" I didn't have a clean answer, because some people don't want success, they want shortcuts. And some don't want lives, they want access. We talked for hours, not polished talk, not careful talk, messy talk. She cried when she talked about her mother, laughed awkwardly when she talked about how ridiculous the situation sounded out loud. Got angry not at me, not at David, but at the unfairness of being dragged into a crime she never committed. "I keep thinking, what if I'd been louder online?" she said. "What if I'd posted more? Protected myself better?" That line broke something in me, because that's what victims always do. They take responsibility for someone else's cruelty. Over the next 3 days, she stayed nearby. We walked, we talked. We ate bad airport sandwiches and laughed at the absurdity of how our lives had collided. No scripts, no performances, just two women connected by damage neither of us asked for. And somewhere in the middle of all that honesty, I realized something unsettling. What my son had fallen for wasn't French. It wasn't an accent. It wasn't mystery. It was authenticity, or what he thought was authenticity. Christina hadn't fooled him by being exotic. She'd fooled him by mirroring sincerity. Camille, the real one, didn't try to charm me. She didn't try to be impressive. She just tried to be understood. Before she left, she hesitated. "Do you think your son hates me?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "No," I said. "He doesn't know you yet." She nodded, accepting that answer even though it wasn't comforting. As we hugged goodbye, she whispered, "Thank you for believing me." That stuck with me, because belief is the first thing liars steal, and the hardest thing victims ever get back. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table alone. Same table. Different reality. I didn't know if David would ever want to meet her. I didn't know if bringing her into this would heal anything or reopen wounds. But I knew one thing for certain: truth had a face now. And it wasn't smiling for approval, it was just real. Sometimes the right ending takes the longest road. David didn't answer right away when I told him about Camille. The real Camille. I didn't sell it, didn't persuade, didn't push. I just said there's someone who wants to meet you. No expectations, no pressure. 3 days passed. Then he texted one word, okay. We met at the same coffee shop where this story had quietly begun. Same tables. Same smell of roasted beans. Same afternoon light slanting through the windows, but nothing else was the same. David arrived early, sat with his hands wrapped around a cup he wasn't drinking from. He looked thinner, older. Like someone who had lived through something his face hadn't caught up to yet. Camille walked in a few minutes later. No red dress, no performance, just jeans, a sweater, and nervous energy she didn't bother hiding. She stopped when she saw him, not dramatically, just respectfully. Hi, she said softly. David nodded. Hi, they sat, and for a moment neither spoke. No script rushed in to save them. No charm filled the silence. Just two people who had both been collateral damage in someone else's war. I'm sorry, Camille said first, for everything, even the things I didn't do. David looked at her for a long time. I believed in something that wasn't real, he said finally, and it wrecked my confidence. Camille nodded. Someone used both of us. That was it. Not romance, not destiny, truth. They talked for 2 hours. About what it feels like to be manipulated, about shame that doesn't belong to you, about how easily kindness gets mistaken for weakness. No flirting, no future talk, just honesty. When we left, David hugged me not tightly, not dramatically, but sincerely. Thank you, he said, for not forcing this. Weeks passed, then months. David and Camille stayed in touch. Emails at first, then calls, no rushing. No timelines, no green cards, no expectations, just curiosity and respect. When David told me he was flying to France, my heart stopped for half a second. Then he smiled and said, I'm not chasing anything. I'm just going to see, and that made all the difference. France wasn't a fairy tale. It was ordinary, messy, beautiful. They walked, they talked. They met Camille's family, real family, loud, loving, imperfect. No one tried to impress anyone. 6 months later, an envelope arrived, cream-colored, handwritten. Inside was a simple invitation, small ceremony, Provence, immediate family only, no rush, no spectacle. Before I RSVP'd, David hugged me. You were right to investigate, he said quietly, and you were wrong not to trust me. I nodded. I know, I replied. He smiled, but we're okay now. And we were, not because nothing broke, but because we repaired it honestly. Standing in Provence months later, watching my son marry a woman who didn't perform love but lived it, I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes monsters don't just destroy. Sometimes they clear the path, they expose what matters. They burn away illusion, they force truth to stand on its own. Christina Marsh took a lot from us, but she didn't take everything. She didn't take our future. She didn't take our integrity. And she didn't take the one thing she never understood. Real connection doesn't rush. It doesn't manipulate. It doesn't need a timeline. It just stays. As I watched David laugh, real laughter, unguarded, I realized something else. The insult she'd thrown at me that first night, the one she never thought I'd understand. Ugly cow, she was wrong. I wasn't ugly. I wasn't stupid. I was the woman who saw the truth early, endured the fallout, and stayed standing long enough to save what mattered. Sometimes the hero doesn't get applause. Sometimes she gets blamed. Sometimes she stands alone in a quiet house with cold food and burning candles. But in the end, she gets her family back, and that was worth everything.